This video will help you understand some of the pros and cons of moving money from an old retirement plan. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Dime. I'm a financial planner out of Edmonds, Washington, and I specialize in working with folks to and through retirement. One of the most common reasons for prospective clients reaching out to my office is to inquire into the pros and cons of moving their old retirement accounts either to a new retirement account or to IRAs. Generally, this is because after a while of having multiple 401ks stack up from old employers, they're just not quite sure how to consolidate things and which option's best. And while of course the correct answer will depend on your situation, I'm going to lay out some general best practices, pros and cons, risks and benefits of moving money, and then you can ultimately use that to fuel a decision on your end as to what you would like to do with your old retirement accounts. So let's jump in. For the purposes of simplicity, I'm just going to call old retirement accounts 401ks or old 401ks. But rest assured, if you have a 403b, 457b plan, pension, etc., all of these recommendations, pros and cons, are generally applicable. The way I see it is you have three main options for what to do with old retirement account money. Number one, you can leave the account as it is. Number two, you can move that old account into your new employer-sponsored plan if you have one. And number three, you can move that account into either an IRA and or a Roth IRA, depending on the tax classification of the employer plan. Theoretically, there's other options with what you could do with your account. You could cash it out, you could do a Roth conversion. There's other options, but I guess just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to keep it to those three main options before. So let's start with the pros and cons of option number one, leaving the 401k as it is today. Well, I generally don't recommend this, but it is the simplest solution because it requires you to do nothing. Now, some other pros might be you're familiar with the platform, you're familiar with how to change investment allocations, you're comfortable with the investment selection, you're comfortable with the interface, all those things. In addition, there might be some unique features. So for example, a lot of the larger retirement accounts out there today permit the use of what's called a brokerage link, where you can essentially invest your 401k into your own personally managed retirement account, where you can customize the options within there. Fidelity is really common for allowing this with some of the major technology companies. And unfortunately, if you were to leave your old 401k and move it to a new 401k, you'd lose out on that unless your new 401k has that option too. The other pro of leaving the money as is all the fees and stuff generally will stay the same. So there's normally like an account annual maintenance fee of some kind, like $20 to $100 or so. And you would pay that if you left your money at the old 401k. And this is a pro compared to, say, moving it into an IRA and hiring an advisor to manage the money. Generally, an advisor is going to charge more than $20 to $100 a year. And so in this way, you're saving money by paying less in fees. Some of the negatives associated with leaving old retirement account money as is, well, now you're probably going to be paying twice the annual administration fees because you can have your old 401k and that's going to be an annual fee. And then you're going to have your new employer-sponsored plan most likely, and that'll be another annual fee. And so you're paying two annual fees when you have one retirement-oriented portfolio, ideally, is kind of how you're seeing it. In the future, as you're trying to globally wealth manage your money, that's all the harder when you have two different platforms to deal with investment selection and investment allocations. In addition, when you're looking to do distributions from the account, it's really hard to customize which portfolio you take which segment of the money from. That gets into a little bit of market timing. I'm not going to get into that in today's video, but just to keep it simple, that's very hard to do with more than one account. In addition, when it comes to required minimum distribution time in your mid-70s, since all 401ks cannot be aggregated together, you're going to have to do an individual required minimum distribution calculation on every single old retirement account you have. And that's pretty cumbersome, and I have rarely ever seen someone do that successfully. And each required minimum distribution has to come out of that specific account. You can't do a bunch of math and then take all the required minimum distributions out of one account. In addition, if the employer-sponsored plan changes investment custodians, you'll have to figure out that new investment custodian's interface. So, for example, if the old 401k gets sold to a different provider or a different provider takes it over, well, now your money gets moved and you have to figure all the stuff out again. Option number two is you could move old 401k money to your new 401k. Generally, this is one of the two preferred options I recommend to clients, and that's due to the simplicity of now having all of your retirement assets, ideally most of them, consolidated into one retirement account. As we touched on earlier, this makes wealth management a lot easier because you have less accounts to worry about allocating. You'll have less accounts to do required minimum distribution calculations through. Now, obviously, we'll have access to new investments, which might be a pro or con depending on your comfort level there. But maybe if you're picking up the ability to do some customized stuff, that's valuable to you. In addition, you'd pick up all the benefits of a new 401k plan, specifically as it pertains to 401k loaning. So for example, with your old employer-sponsored plan, if you leave that company, you no longer can do 401k loans over there. But if you move everything into your new 401k, well, it might have taken you a while before you accumulated enough value in there to do a sizable 401k loan. But if you move your old 401k to new 401k, well, you pretty much accelerated that, and now you can do a 401k loan on whatever the new prevailing balance is. In addition, and I'll touch on this in a future video, but the rule of 55 could take over. Basically what that means is whenever you leave this new employer, you're allowed to withdraw money from this employer-sponsored plan before the age of 60, after the age of 55, as long as it's your most recent employer that you left. Now, you'd still pay income tax as if it's pre-tax money, but you're avoiding the 10% penalty tax, which is ideally what we're trying to save on anyways. And for some qualified public safety officials, you can actually do this starting at age 50. As we touched on before, one of the pros of consolidating into the new 401k is that you now only have one annual administration fee because you only have one employer-sponsored plan now. Some of the cons with this is you'd probably need to coordinate the rollover between these two institutions by yourself, which can be a little bit time-consuming if you're not familiar with the process. You'd obviously lose the investment options and things like that with your old 401k like we talked about. And unfortunately, this move is irrevocable, meaning once you move from an old 401k to a new 401k, you're not going to be able to move it back. And you can't move things into an IRA or Roth IRA once you move things to the new 401k, barring some very unique exceptions. And that segues nicely into option number 3, which is moving your old 401k money into IRAs or Roth IRAs respectively. And this is generally the other option I recommend to clients. Rarely do I ever recommend just leaving it at the old 401k. The nice thing about moving money to an IRA or Roth IRA is you have full investment control. Now that could also be a con if you're not super familiar with what you're doing, but from a pro standpoint, that means you have full customization as it pertains to prepping for distributions for retirement income. Eventually, if everything moves here, you have one account to do required minimum distributions from. If ever you've thought about using your IRA in a self-directed fashion, and I don't just mean picking stocks, but for example, using it for real estate investing, you can't do that through your 401k, unless, for example, it's a discretionarily managed 401k for your business that you are a solo 401k plan participant on. You can for sure do Roth conversions between IRA and Roth IRA. Some employer plans are permitting in-plan Roth conversions. That's becoming more and more popular. But for sure with an IRA to Roth IRA, that's totally doable. And of course, if you move money into an IRA, you could hire an advisor to help manage that money. Now, some 401k plans do permit advisors to manage the money in there, within certain restrictions, but that's not yet ubiquitous. So for now, for the most part, to keep it simple, moving it into an IRA or Roth IRA would for sure let an advisor manage the money. Now, this is a bit controversial out there, but typically advisor-managed money significantly outperforms consumer-managed money. Now, of course, there are circumstances where advisors don't, and on average, advisors do not outperform the market to any degree. So I'm not making the argument there. What I am saying is generally when consumers can control their investment options, they tend to underperform advisors. And I'll link down below to the studies I'm referencing, but that could be one of the benefits of moving money from an old 401k to an IRA or Roth IRA, is you get to hire an advisor to manage it, and you no longer have to deal with it yourself. Not to mention some of the value in delegating things from the mental load onto somebody else. Some of the cons of doing this is it's not necessarily irrevocable except for the money you moved into a Roth IRA. Once money lands in a Roth IRA, it can't move into a Roth 401k. However, once money moves into a regular or pre-tax IRA, you can move that money into a pre-tax 401k. Now, some employer plans don't permit incoming rollovers. I've actually never met a plan that does that, but I've heard that it's possible, that they could say no thanks. But for the most part, you can move IRA money into pre-tax 401k. Another one of the cons is you lose that rule of 55. You can't early withdraw money out of an IRA or Roth IRA unless you're doing like a 72T distribution or you qualify for some other 10% exception, but you wouldn't qualify for the rule of 55. Of course, when you move money into an IRA, you lose the ability to do 401k loaning on that money because you can't loan out of IRAs or Roth IRAs. And if you're trying to do a lot of backdoor Roth IRAs for you and your family, once money lands in a pre-tax IRA, it sort of disturbs the ability to cleanly do backdoor Roth IRAs. And so at that point, you'd want to move that IRA back into the 401k. And I'll link above to my previous video explaining why that's a problem and the logistics on how you would move money from an IRA to a 401k. Another one of the cons, specifically if you move it to an IRA or Roth IRA and you hire an advisor, is generally there's going to be more costs associated with doing that. Like I said before, advisors generally charge somewhere all in of around 1% to 3% a year. and so you'd be picking up that extra cost. Ideally, you're making up for it with value elsewhere, either through investment returns or financial planning services and things like that. And again, I'll link down below to the studies I'm referring to, but that is an extra cost that you would pick up if you decided to hire an advisor to manage the IRA or Roth IRA. So as you can see, there's some pros and cons to each move, and it really does depend on your individual circumstance and your competency and comfort level with handling certain moves yourself. In fact, I can think of a particular case study with a client that was here in the Seattle area, and they decided to move to Kentucky so that they could buy some property. In doing so, they had to leave their old employers, which left some old 401k money up for grabs that we were originally planning on moving into IRAs and Roth IRAs. However, I actually recommended that they don't do that, because if they needed to free up some extra liquidity for a larger down payment or whatever, and they wanted to use a 401k loan for that, well, what we'd want to do is move the old 401k money to the new 401k. That way they could do 401k loans from the new employer plan. Once they move it into an IRA or Roth IRA, yes, we could move the IRA back into the 401k, but that's a lot of logistics, kind of a pain in the butt. And the money that we move from the Roth 401k to the Roth IRA, that irrevocably cannot move back into a Roth 401k. So we decided to put a pause on doing any sort of 401k to IRA rollovers or 401k to 401k rollovers, because that also would be irrevocable until they leave. And so we're just kind of waiting it out until they were able to buy a piece of property. They've actually since been able to buy that property in Kentucky, and so now we're going to do the 401k to IRA rollovers. But that's an example where it really does depend on the individual circumstance, rather than just saying this is the best move for everybody. One last thing I want to touch on is bankruptcy or creditor protection. So there's a common trope out there that money inside of an IRA is not as protected as money inside of a 401k plan, and that is true. So 401k money benefits from ERISA protection. Without getting too specific, basically just shields that money from access by creditors in the event of a bankruptcy. However, classic IRA and Roth IRA money is not protected from bankruptcy by way of creditors, unless the IRA or Roth IRA is funded from an old 401k to IRA rollover. Again, there's some nuance there. Is it something I would use to drastically influence my decision? Probably not, unless I see myself on the verge of some kind of bankruptcy. But for the most part, just keep in mind that you could potentially lose some bankruptcy protection if you move the money from a 401k to IRA, and then it significantly grows from there. So from a calls to action standpoint, if you have old 401k or old retirement plan money, I would absolutely look at either consolidating that into IRAs or Roth IRAs, or moving it into your new employer-sponsored plan. I rarely ever see that it's beneficial for clients to keep a bunch of old retirement accounts out there. And in fact, that's one of the first things we're helping clients with when they come into the office and dump out their shoebox of financial stuff, is cleaning up all these old retirement accounts that they have from previous employers that unfortunately have been significantly underperforming the market generally because no one's keeping an eye on them. Unfortunately, that just means wasted time and energy for clients, and so to avoid that, I'd highly recommend proactively deciding what your plan of action is going to be if you ever plan on making a change to your employer. I'll link below to the IRS's rollover chart that breaks down which accounts can move into which other types of accounts, and that might help you make a more informed decision as to a course of action. If you have further questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below or get in touch on the website. We'll help you get squared away. Have an awesome rest of your week. We'll talk to you later. Bye.